Presentation. It's just Morgan and I, and we know questions will probably come up as we're giving a presentation, and we ask if you would please not mind holding on to those questions and talking to staff at the end of the presentation. We will be available, both of us, roaming the room or at stations to talk to, but we have other staff members who can answer questions also. We would love if you could answer the questionnaire. They're on each of the tables. So there's a questionnaire. If you prefer to do it online, our online open house, which is very similar content to what we'll be discussing today, and an online version of the questionnaire that you could do from your mobile app or on your computer, just went live about 2 hours ago. So we're really excited about that. And what else do I need to mention? Let's see. We are here until 8:30. My understanding is that we need to be out of the room at 9. Is that correct? And cleaned up. So not to cut you short, but that's the parameters that we're working under. I see most of you got chairs. There might be some more chairs in the back. There's a couple up here if people would prefer to take a seat. There are restrooms to the right and to the left of the doors, and there's some food and water on the table over here. So we ask you to please make yourself comfortable and take care of yourself and do what you need to do to make yourself comfortable. With that, I think we want to talk a little bit about what is bringing each of you here, or what is bringing all of us here, and the reasons and the issues that we each brought into this room. I think it's fair to say that we all came here for different reasons. Some people may have seen new houses being built in their neighborhoods, and they're concerned that houses just aren't fitting, maybe isn't the right size, maybe it's not the right design, maybe it's not the right price point, that you're thinking, wow, that's a really expensive house in my neighborhood, and I'm not used to that. Maybe some people came just to share their concerns about what they're seeing happening in our city, some demolitions. We've heard about tree removal, parking, traffic, certainly are all issues that I think some people have concerns about. But maybe you're also thinking about the future, and you're planning an addition to your own house, perhaps. And you're wondering about these rules and how it'll affect your plans for the future if you are planning an addition or to remodel your attic or add on to the back, or perhaps you're thinking about doing an accessory dwelling unit. Maybe some of you are thinking about downsizing, and you're in a house where you've raised your family and now are thinking maybe it's time to move into something smaller, and perhaps you're looking in your own neighborhood and can't find very many options. So I think we all come into this room today with a lot of emotion, and I think the issue of residential infill, we have seen definitely a lot of emotion around it and strong feelings and people bringing really heartfelt concerns. So we wanted to acknowledge that today, but we also wanted to ask everybody, and the Stakeholder Advisory Committee did this in a really nice way. They asked everybody to be polite to each other, use kind words when we're expressing our concerns. We are, after all, talking about people's homes, so houses where people live. We're talking about houses that people built, people in our community built, and we're talking about people's neighborhoods and houses in these neighborhoods. So if you would join me, please, in using polite and kind words, we would really appreciate that. After all, we are trying to create a healthy dialogue about these issues. We can have disagreements. We have had disagreements in the last year of conversation about this. But what we want to talk a lot about is the trade-offs and choices that we need to make as a community. And with that, I think we'll begin the presentation. So what we are going to cover, I will cover a little bit of the project background and the context, introduce you to the project topics, and then Morgan will talk to you about our draft proposal overview, and that's what is really on the boards, is our draft proposals, and then what the next steps are. So here's our process. Tonight, we're launching. It's June 15th, and we have an 8-week public comment period until August 15th. We have, so we're taking public input during this time. We have 6 open houses, like this one. This is our first one, but we also have meetings that are being hosted by other people and that people are inviting us to. We're keeping our website up to date. If you know of a community group that wants to meet with us, please let us know. And we would be happy to go and talk to them about our proposal and hopefully hear their feedback too. After our 8-week period, we review the feedback that we received from all avenues, including the online questionnaire and through those hosted meetings and these open houses. In October, we're revising our proposal, and we plan to be at City Council with a recommendation in November. Let me talk quickly about that recommendation. Some of you might be used to zoning code projects where we propose the zoning code language. We're not doing that at this point in time. We will get to that next year in 2017. What we're taking to City Council is a resolution for them to consider what the concepts are. So right now we're sticking at a higher level of what is the concept, and once we get City Council direction on what the concept is, and once they vote on that, then we will go and write zoning code. So then we'll have public processes next year also. So what do we mean by infill? Infill means the development of vacant land in an area that is already built up. These pictures show some examples of infill. You have new houses being built next to old ones. This is in contrast to some cities where you just see lots of houses being built at one time, where there's some green field and they're building, outside of the outskirts of the city. This is a zoning map, and it depicts what land is reserved for different uses. The gray shows the industrial and employment areas. The red is the commercial and mixed-use zones. The green is open space. Multi-dwelling residential zoning is in blue, and the yellow is in single-dwelling residential. As you can see, this project is really focusing on the yellow areas, which is a lot of the city. It's 44% of the city's land mass, and it has been our focus. And just to clarify, traditionally, single dwelling means 1 unit per lot. Multi-dwelling would be allowing multiple units per lot. Morgan will elaborate on that distinction during his presentation. So as infill occurs, neighborhoods change. And for many of us, that change can be exciting. More people could mean more vibrant urban spaces and more vibrant urban spaces. For others, the pace of change is jarring, and infill causes many concerns. One of those concerns is that new houses can be built that look much larger than existing houses. There's also concern about the demolition of viable housing stock. Another concern is the rising cost of housing. Many of us wouldn't actually be able to afford the very homes that we live in. In addition, this is displacing lower income households to the fringes of the city, if they can afford to live in Portland at all. This is a key equity and livability issue for our city. These maps here show, So there's 4 maps here that show a general concept, which is the dark areas on the map show where an average Portland household could not afford to rent housing at all. So the top left map is the average Portland household not being able to rent quite in a two-bedroom unit in quite a bit of the house. And of course, the situation gets much worse for different populations. For a 3-person low-income house, most of the city is dark colored, which means they couldn't afford to live in those areas. An average Latino household, it gets worse, and an average Black household even worse. The final concern I want to mention is the lack of, that we've heard, the final concern is the lack of housing choices. If you're familiar with the term middle housing, it refers to the fact that in the US cities, like Portland, there is a missing housing type between detached single-family dwellings, which is on the far left, and mid-rise apartments to the far right. In this project, we're talking about detached single-family homes and duplex, triplex, so we're still on the far left of the spectrum of the housing types. This slide shows that we currently have two predominant housing types in Portland. We have a lot of detached single dwelling houses shown in the blue on the slide, almost 60% of the housing stock. And then we have a lot of mid-rise and apartments shown in the green and the dark blue on the left, and that's almost 40% of our housing stock. So these small slices where it says ADUs, duplexes, and attached housing are really a small proportion of the housing stock that we have in Portland. And when people talk about the missing middle, that's the area that they're talking about. So in response to community concerns, Mayor Hales asked us to start a project that worked on adapting Portland's single dwelling zoning rules to meet the needs of current and future residents. Our project included looking at single dwelling zones, looking at the development rules about those single dwelling zones, how high, big, how far setback, outdoor area requirements for houses, to look at the types of housing allowed, or the number of units allowed in these areas, and look at housing form, whether it be attached, detached, narrow units, etc. What isn't included in this project and isn't included in any of our proposals are rules about demolition or deconstruction, historic preservation, design review, land division rules, permit fees, system development charges, tiny houses on wheels, affordable housing projects. Other projects may be addressing some of these issues and through other channels. Before I pass it on to Morgan, there's just 4 more things I wanted to mention, and those are key contexts that we keep in mind when we're doing our planning work. The first one is that Portland is growing. We're expecting 123,000 new households. That equates to about 260,000 more people by the year 2035, which is what the year that we're planning for. This slide shows that we are on track for that population increase. As you can see, from 2000 to 2015, we're on track with our projections. This next slide shows that our housing needs are also changing. So while we're growing, our population is shifting also. By 2035, the persons per household will decrease from 2.3 to 2.1. Our percentage of households with children will also decrease from 1/3 to 1/4. We'll see an increased racial and cultural diversity and an increased aging population as the baby boomers age. Through the work of the comprehensive plan recently, we've been working on creating complete and healthy neighborhoods. Places where people of all ages and abilities have safe and convenient access to more of the goods and services they need to meet their daily needs. Our goal by the year 2035 is for 80% of Portlanders to live in complete communities. The last point I want to share with you is that the comprehensive plan sets out many policies to achieve our goals for complete communities. For the purposes of this project, we consolidated the many policies talking about this into a list of 8 objectives. What we're striving to do here is to create rules that will optimize each of these objectives. So we're trying to find rules that will provide diverse housing options while at the same time be economically feasible and provide clear rules for development. We're also trying to make sure that new development fits neighborhood context and is resource efficient and supports housing affordability. As you can see, this is a balancing act. The two that came to the forefront during the discussion of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee members were the providing housing diversity, diverse housing opportunities, and the fitting the neighborhood context. Those seem to be the main perspectives held by many of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee members, and Morgan will touch on that when he's sharing his proposal. So we at BPS feel that the proposal that we're bringing forward strikes the right balance between these goals, but we definitely want to hear your feedback on that. But we ask you to also think of the proposals in this context, so you can consider these objectives and help us think about the trade-offs that we're making as we're choosing one option versus another. And with that, I'll pass it on to Morgan, who will share what the proposals are.
Hello, everybody. So, quite a super challenging project, right? There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of expectations, concerns to address. But I think we've come up with a package that of draft proposals that at least is a good starting point for our conversation with you. I'm Morgan Tracy. I'm the project manager for the residential infill project. Just want to mention again, the project addresses 3 topics, and there are a total of 8 draft proposals in all. I just want to give a flavor of each, as there's a lot more information, and as Sandra mentioned, there's staff available around the room to help answer your more detailed questions after the presentation. So the first topic looks at scale of houses, and the first 3 proposals address the scale of new houses and home additions. And these speak to size, height, and setback constraints. The scale of houses for size, this image is showing a range of house sizes. Older homes are generally here in the 1,500 square foot range. Current zoning code allows houses to be as large as 6,750 square feet on a 5,000 square foot lot. Don't worry, they're not building those yet. So the largest house on a 5,000 square foot lot in 2013 was nearly 4,500 square feet. And there's an indication that the trend for larger house sizes, is trending upward. So to address this trend and ensure that new homes and home additions are closer in character to existing houses, a proposed size limit would cap houses to 2,500 square feet, excluding basements and detached accessory structures. While the proposed size limit establishes a maximum size, it still provides for flexibility in how homes are built or arranged on the lot. Homes could either be low and spread out, as a house on the left side there, a 1-story house, or they can take the square footage and stack it up into 2 stories, and then either wider 2-story or narrower 2-story. So there's a nice amount of flexibility that's built into this size limitation proposal. Next, we looked at height. So a key change here is how we measure height. Currently, houses are measured from the highest adjacent grade, like the yellow house in the upper right picture. The result is that on the downhill side, houses that are measured this way appear much taller than the maximum height limit. The proposed change would measure from the lowest adjacent grade so that the height of the house is better related to the surrounding topography, like the White House on the right picture there. In addition, the proposal reduces the height limit for flat roof houses to further reduce the apparent bulk and lessen impacts of shading on adjacent neighbors. Lastly, for scale of houses, we looked at setbacks. And to allow for larger front yards, more yard space, and be a little more in character and consistent with other homes that are set further back than with larger front setbacks, an increased setback is being proposed. However, we also recognize in some areas the established setbacks on the street are much closer than that. So the proposal would also allow new houses to reduce setbacks to fall in line with their adjacent neighboring houses. The second topic area looks at ways to allow additional housing types in order to provide a diversity of housing options and in different arrangements, and also to create additional, less expensive units in areas that are closer to transit, near parks, stores, and schools. And these provide alternatives for those unable to afford larger houses, or they do not wish to live in a larger apartment building. So these ideas supplement current allowances for accessory dwelling units and duplexes, which are already on corner lots. So Sandra mentioned in the single dwelling zones, there are some exceptions to the one house per lot rule. So currently you can have an accessory dwelling unit with a detached house, a single family house, or on corner lots you can have a duplex. The proposal, this proposal responds to recent city council direction that amended the new comp plan policies in order to enable and encourage more middle housing near centers and corridors. In other words, these are areas that are walkable, well served by transit, and close to jobs, schools, and shops. The proposal would allow for extra accessory dwelling units, duplexes, and triplexes on corners. But here's the catch. So this proposal is paired with the size limitation of new houses. So once you have the size of the house or the structure established and limited, then the question becomes, what's the appropriate number of units that can fit within that size structure? Another proposal would allow for additional multiple smaller detached houses to be clustered around common open spaces in what we're calling cottage clusters. And finally, the R25 zone amounts to less than 4% of the city's land area. And this zone it allows for 1 unit per 2,500 square feet, but presently larger lots, 5,000 square foot lots, could be built with one single house. So in order to make more efficient use of this scarce zone, the proposal would require that at least 2 units on a 5,000 square foot lot be built if they're starting with a vacant lot. The slide shows a number of options how this can be accomplished, either with a duplex or by including an accessory dwelling unit. The last project topic relates to pre-platted historically narrow lots. These are lots in the R5 zone that were subdivided before modern zoning and are often narrower or smaller than current minimum lot sizes. However, they do provide another housing type opportunity, which is smaller houses on smaller lots. These smaller houses are often less expensive. I mean, they are generally less expensive than a newer house, a newer, larger house on a larger lot. So what we're talking about, the proposal would allow for historically narrow lots to be built on when they're located in those same areas, near centers and corridors, closer to transit, parks, shops, and jobs. For this audience, Southwest primarily, there are not many of these pre-platted lots in Southwest. There's a small pocket near PCC Sylvania, and a small little area between Hillsdale and Multnomah Village. Just for reference. On these lots, when a house is removed, new houses would be required to be attached, as shown in that diagram on the top there. The new house would be required to be attached to maintain that sort of consistent width pattern along the street. As an alternative, and to encourage retaining existing houses, the proposal would also allow for flag lots, so that one house could be built behind the existing house, as illustrated in that diagram. And finally, the final proposal relates to garages and parking on narrow houses to address some issues relating to their form. As you can see in this photo, the driveways occupy most of the front yard, remove available on-street parking, and take up space for street trees. Additionally, on these narrow lots, the width of the garage door dominates the front facade. The proposal would be to no longer allow street-facing garages, while still allowing for rear garages or shared driveways. And parking would not be required in order to preserve on-street parking opportunities. So this just shows a comparison of with or without the driveway. So finally, so these proposals, another round, a little before and after.
It would just probably be more accurate if the second one had cars.
Yeah, they're all part of the street, right?
Yeah.
You forgot to show the street full of parked cars.
Well, we didn't green up the lawn. We greened up the lawn. So these proposals were formulated after extensive discussions with our 26-member stakeholder advisory committee. And I'd like again to call them out and recognize them for their hard work and diligence, their commitment and thoughtful feedback. They were with us for 9 months and 15 meetings and lots of hours and lots of conversations, and really kept got good spirited feedback. As Sandra previously noted, there are a number of objectives in this project that we were seeking to balance in advance, but there are two predominant perspectives that emerged from our stakeholder committee. Many of the committee members favored a housing diversity perspective and said that the current housing situation requires bold action by the city to address inadequate housing supply and increasing costs, which lead to fewer opportunities and choices across income and mobility spectrums. This group called for the creation of more housing types throughout all areas of the city. So where the proposal is to focus around centers and corridors, this group felt that we should be bolder and broader and go bigger to support current and future residents. These members generally accepted the reduced scale proposals as a pragmatic trade-off for additional housing type flexibility. Other committee members favored a neighborhood context perspective and opposed a one-size-fits-all approach, advocating instead for a zoning code applied to neighborhood pattern areas and contexts across the city. These members said zoning should clearly identify and regulate the allowed density, and that areas appropriate for higher density should be rezoned to R2.5 or R2. Limited changes were supported that would allow increased density very close to centers and selectively along corridors. So in contrast, these members thought we should go a little tighter. And of course, this is a bit of a simplification of a complex series of discussions. And so again, there are a number of SAC members here tonight, and I encourage you to visit with them and talk to them about their individual perspectives. So for tonight's open house, what we're looking for, we're here to share with you accurate information about our project proposals so that you're better informed and can provide us with more valuable feedback. So we're asking that you view the info boards, talk with staff, ask us questions, talk to the stakeholder committee members, complete the questionnaires. There are copies on the table. There's a box in the front of the room, back of the room for me, where you can drop those off. As Sandra mentioned, we have our online open house and an online version of the questionnaire, which will have a link that we can share with you that you can distribute, so you can help us spread the word and help others get engaged in the process. Just another sort of review, the next steps, we're looking for public input for the next 3 months, June through August. Next 2 months, 60 days. Next 2 months. Yeah, we're in the middle of June, sorry. It went so fast. Reviewing feedback for September, revising the proposal in October, going to the City Council with our recommendation in November. They'll give us direction in the form of a resolution that we'll then take to start codifying these changes in 2017. So to learn more, you can visit our project website, participate in the online questionnaire, and connect with project staff through our email. And we'll have a copy of this presentation up on our website tomorrow. And again, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. And I'll be wandering around the room if you spot me and want to ask more questions. So thank you again for coming. We'll be at our various stations. If you have questions, we'll have. So we're not doing a town hall. We're here to.
I just wanted to know. I didn't see on your agenda if you want us to kind of anticipate, or we can ask questions as a group to the specialists such as yourself.
Yeah. So we're not asking to ask.
We need to
ask questions.
Thank you, sir. We'd like to ask a few questions, and you seem to be the professional. May we please get some information? I appreciate that very much. We can have a conversation with you. I can begin, or someone else can begin. Is someone who has a question or a comment?
Actually, if you don't mind.
I'd like to know why there's no mention of the environment, of the trees, of habitat, of gardens.
Sounds like people have a lot of questions, I understand. We have 3 topics. People came here for different reasons. And so if we say,
Let's hear those reasons. Just quickly, what are the reasons people came here?
ma'am, I'm sorry, I think we're going to have to stick with how we plan to have the agenda. which is
What are
there's
you afraid
historic
of?
narrow lots,
What are you afraid of?
housing types.
This is a fundamental issue of accountability. And she is asking a legitimate question in a public forum.
Can I see a show of hands of who's interested
Well, I
in
wanna
the
finish
historically
my-
narrow lots
Please.
discussion? I just want to see a show of hands.
She might be saying
Ask who
something.
wants,
Five, thank
ask
you.
who wants Q&A.
Wait,
This
can
is
I?
fundamental accountability.
Can I see a show of hands of who is interested in the scale of house issue?
Everybody.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Can I see a show of hands of who is interested mostly in talking about the housing types conversation?
Everyone.
So everybody is interested in all, so if the historically narrow lots, there's 5 people who answered to that. Is that correct?
We don't have a very few here, unless they change their voting.
I
Right?
think it would save you time if you let a few people speak, and otherwise it's going to be just stand and side conversations. I just think, as far as an organizational way to go, it would save you time to hear from a few members of our larger group. This is our only Southwest meeting with you, and some of us would like to share things. And so I just think a few people talking might open that up for you. You can be efficient, you can save time, and we can go from there. It's a suggestion, I don't know how people feel.
Okay, we'll do that. It sounds like we're gonna start though with a topic that most people want to talk about, which is the scale of houses. Because we want to make the most efficient use of everybody's time and not hold people who are wanting to talk about the other subjects onto something else.
And therefore, I think, a positive comment, and that is that I'm a developer. I don't have to sharpen my pencil and use my calculator. And I see, or I want to know how the planning department is coordinated design so that it is the perfect model for developers to make a lot of money.
Yes.
And reduce the quality of our housing. Increase displacement. Decrease affordability. It is the perfect model, just like selling tea where you cut it and double the price, or sell tops and double the price. I see it. I love it. But I don't want to develop in this town. If 35 years from now, we are going to look back and say, in 2016, we created a prefab slum. That it is data informed and it is clearly logical. I do not want to have our citizens discuss and consider this plan without putting that view in there. You have some work to do. Don't stop your work. I don't have a planning department. You do.
So are you referring to the size of house and the
Size.
scale? So the proposal is to reduce the scale of houses from 6,700 square foot houses to 2,500 square feet.
Quality
And
issue,
you're,
not quantity issue. Figure it out.
thank you.
I hope you understand that, but I hope that that is the lens. That is the context for us to consider the place we want to live, the rhythmics of our neighborhood, of our city.
Okay, thank you. Let's give somebody else a chance. Yes, Miss in the front.
So I do know people in this area who have been frustrated when somebody took down a modestly sized house and put up a 6,000 square foot sort of monstrosity thing. That happens. But I think your 2,500 square foot is just too small. If you made that 3,000 or something like that, I think you would solve a lot of the problems with that. I don't know how you feel, but that's
So the comment was that reducing the house size to 2,500 square feet is too small, that perhaps a 3,000 square foot size limit would be more reasonable. And I'm going to ask Morgan to clarify here what the 2,500 applies to.
So the 2,500 square feet is related to the size of the lot. That's the first starting place. So 5,000 square foot lot, 2,500 square feet. The square footage that's excluded from that includes areas in the basement, so things that are 4 feet below grade, and non-habitable attic spaces. And in addition, there's an allowance for an 800 square foot detached accessory structure that wouldn't be counted in that. So if you were creating an accessory dwelling unit or wanted to have additional space in the backyard, you can break up the mass of that square footage into two separate structures.
I like these smaller square footage actually.
Can you repeat each question, because people in the back can't hear the question?
I have a question expanding on that. Can you tell me what the staff committee has come up with as what is the minimum square footage that an average living room, kitchen, and dining room is? And does that limit larger families from living close to the city? Because there's very little space left over in square footage after you give those containers. So my question is, what is the average size of just common space, and how much does that leave for bedroom space? And are you kind of maybe discriminating against larger families?
So the question is, for the areas of the house that are sort of fixed areas, kitchens, bathrooms, hallways, once you take out those areas, what's left over for bedroom, and does the size limitation, the 2,500 square foot example, potentially restrict larger families from living in a house? So there are certain building code requirements that have an absolute minimum size for square footages, and I think they're well below what anybody would realistically build, aside from a tiny house sort of thing. But consider an 800 square foot ADU could have 2 bedrooms, and if those exist, we've seen those built. The average size house that was built in 2013, if you take all the homes that were built in 2013, which is about 400, was just over 2,600 square feet. So would it prevent larger families from moving into a smaller house? Not necessarily, but there's a relationship there, certainly.
And part of that context is what I was sharing about the household size, decreasing in size. Most households are getting smaller and smaller over time, so that's part of the demographics that we're trying to plan for. I'm just going to go into the back just so we bounce around the room a little bit. In the purple shirt back there, yeah, the one standing in the middle.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first is, I know you're saying this wouldn't be code until 2017, but how does this impact proposed developments that are being planned and applied for currently? I won't get into specifics, but there's something being considered in my neighborhood where they want to take an R5 lot and build homes that are like 3,600 square feet with no setback. I mean, literally like a 5-foot setback. So how does the city plan for something like that where they're in the application phase? This wouldn't be code until 2017, but they're doing exactly the opposite of what you're trying to achieve on a pretty large scale.
Yeah, so one of those objectives that's on that gray wheel that I showed is predictable land use regulations. And part of that predictability is that when a building permit is applied for, they are vested in the rules that are on the books the day that they apply for them. So these rules would not affect that development.
So that wouldn't affect anything that's being planned currently. Okay. So my other question, sorry, and I'll let somebody else have a chance, is about the setbacks. So Southwest Portland, we're not a grid. We have a lot of odd lots. So when you're saying that the setback rules, I think you said were like 15, was it 15 feet or 30 feet? But that the setback could be reduced to mimic the neighbors. How do you plan for that in neighborhoods where setbacks are all over the place? And wouldn't that still allow developers to basically do whatever they wanted to do and get around that code?
So did everyone hear? Okay, so the question was around the setback proposal, which was to increase the setback, essentially the front yard setback by 5 feet, but there's this allowance to let your house come forward and match your adjacent neighbor. The question is a good one around the differences in different pattern areas. So a lot of the illustrations that you see up here are rectangular lots, which are not totally common in Southwest. So that's a little difference in Southwest. The application of the setback would still apply, though, in terms of going to the adjacent lot, looking at how far the house was set back on that adjacent lot, and keying off of that. So if that adjacent house on the adjacent lot was closer than the 15 feet, the new house that's being built could be at the same distance from the property line as that house.
Question, yes, may I? I just want to understand. So they're not all required to be 15 feet back. If someone else is already 5 feet, the new house next to it could also be just a 5-foot setback.
That's right. Provided the new house, the existing house is already at 5 feet. Right. Yeah. I see a very vigorous hand reaching up over here.
Morgan, I was at one of your workshop meetings with your group, and I appreciate what the intent is, which is to mitigate the impacts of new housing in stable neighborhoods, but also to all of a sudden, this has come up, find ways of adding more housing in the city beyond what the zoning is right now. And it seems to me like it's an end run by the city council by saying, well, we need more housing. And instead of going, we need more housing by way of the middle housing project, why have it overlaid in an infill process when they should be going right back to the beginning to the comp plan and redesignating a lot of land R25. If they want more adaptability or more flexibility in the kinds of units they want, then they can just rezone a lot of the city with that flexible zone. All of a sudden, they're telling us they want different kinds of housing everywhere. And if that's the case, I don't mind a duplex in my R7 zone if it's a 14,000 square foot lot next to me. I won't mind that. And maybe those 2 units might be less money for each of the people who buy it. But don't tell me you're going to put a fourplex next to my house and up the zoning, up the density, when I bought knowing that I was buying an R7 lot with 7,000 square foot and only allowing that kind of density to be in my neighborhood. That's where the rub is. Fine with the different kinds of housing, but don't start banging away at the densities. That's a question. The question is, why don't they go right back and rezone some of the property throughout the city?
Yeah, so the question, I think, if I could try to paraphrase that, is when I was describing the different perspectives of our SAC member makeup, one approach is to provide for additional allowances within the existing single dwelling zones, and like the ADUs, like the duplexes on corners. And that's where our proposal is presently. Another approach would be to come in and rezone to a different zoning. Maybe it's R25, maybe it's a zone that doesn't exist today. That is another approach. And we heard that from our stakeholders and committee members as well. So where we are with our proposal is we're looking at these areas that are near centers, near corridors, near the areas that are close with amenities and transit, as it's what we would term as a smart growth approach, that we're trying to orient these additional units in areas that have infrastructure and services available. The tool to do that is, it's a matter of differences of sort of opinion. I mean, if we came in and said that this map represents a different zone, then that would be that message. So how we get to the end goal of additional smaller, more affordable units within areas that are currently single dwelling areas, that's the objective. So the tool to get us there, I think that's still part of what we're working through. The concept is essentially that. The lady standing.
Hello. My name is Carol McCarthy. I'm the chair of the Multnomah Neighborhood Association. Our neighborhood has worked for 2 years with the city on the comp plan, and I personally am disgusted with the City Planning Bureau. Goal 1 of the land use of the state law that requires the comp plan requires citizen involvement. This whole 2-year process has been a dog and pony show where you guys come to our neighborhood, you pretend like you're interested, and you do what you already have in mind. You already have in the city of Portland enough capacity in the current zoning without changing anything to accommodate more than 120,000 new households. You've destroyed so many of Portland neighborhoods by allowing oversized development. And we've seen planning documents where you've been planning this since 2008, the infill projects. So if you're so incompetent that this is the result of what you've created, I just can't imagine. I think that...
I just want to do a call. Remember I talked about let's be polite?
I am being polite.
I'm sorry. And to stop.
I am polite. I have free speech. What do you want? I say most of the people here, it's their life savings in their neighborhoods. No wonder we're heated up. And I think that you stacked the RIPSAC committee. Of the 26 people, how many of them are paid and being paid to be there are developers, people in the development community who are paid, or any of the advisory committees?
That's a question.
You have lobbyists on there, and then you have the token neighborhood representatives. I don't know that you're taking votes, you're leaking stuff to the press, saying there's a majority opinion without a vote, and you bring out these documents at the last minute with no time for review. It's up to us to try to get people up and let them know that next door to you, you may have a fourplex, and if you come to the neighborhood association, there's nothing we can do for you because the city has sold you down the river. And why are you taxing current residents for future residents? Let the future residents pay for their own. Don't allow them to come in unless there is already adequate infrastructure. So and what about the tree canopy? We've seen, what is the income? I mean, you say you're doing this for affordability. You're using that up front as an argument, but then you say, but our project doesn't guarantee affordability. You say you're doing it for equity, but our project doesn't guarantee equity. What we've seen is every new development is more expensive than what's here. It's displacing our residents who were born and raised here. We have an established neighborhood. We're fine, just leave us alone.
Go to the gentleman back there.
Hi, you made a comment, maybe I'm mistaken. You made a comment when you started, and I appreciate the presentation, that you were taking public comment. Is that correct?
Yes, we're taking public comment during this 8-week period. So we can take that in a variety of forms. One is there's questionnaires on each of the tables. We have an online questionnaire where people can submit their comments that way too. You can certainly send us an email. We're taking notes of this meeting here, and we're going to hosted meetings and hearing from different organizations and community members that way too.
Because I'd be careful if you're stating public comment. I'm a lawyer, and you need to be taking notes pretty rigorously, because these people want their public comment to be put on the record. And we keep going to meetings and asking if it's a public comment, and it doesn't get into the record. Case in point, comp plan.
So this is, so just to clarify again, we're not in the legislative process right now. So when we start the legislative process and we send out our public notice for our Planning and Sustainability Commission meetings, that's when the public record begins for that project. Of course, we are keeping this in the project record, and of course, we are hearing what people have to say, both the emotion and hopefully the specifics about it. I'm really curious to know what people think of the proposals.
But remember one thing, it's also a public meeting, and public meetings require note-taking and people to have discourse, unless you characterize it a different way. Thank you.
They are recording it. They are recording it. I wanted to say that I do thank you, and I do believe you're in earnest, and I think part of the problem is the job you were given. You can't consider the environment. You were asked not to consider historical nature of buildings. You were asked not to consider demolishment when you came up with this plan. I do not blame you. But I would publicly like to go on a record for asking for a moratorium on permits for demolition and permits for residential infill until you have it figured out. Because we need that as a city to grow carefully and thoughtfully. There's so much growth that decisions are happening without the thought that it needs. So I would like to go on public record asking for a moratorium for a year for permitting and business. And it gives more time to people like you, earnest people and citizens, to have their views shown and to make a thoughtful plan.
Yes.
I have two questions. I came in late, so I did the map back here. Sorry. I came in late. Okay, now it's a good way to start. So I noticed the map back there. Is that the city map, or is that a neighborhood map, or what? It just kind of shows the yellow zoning where it's being, I'm assuming that means it's being challenged.
So the map in the back there is our generalized zone map. It's not the detailed zoning map, it doesn't show specific zones. It's basically distinguishing single dwelling zones from multi-dwelling zones, commercial, industrial. The nature of that map is just to show the scope of this project, which is just the yellow single dwelling zones.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, this map?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
this map?
Yeah.
This is not our, well, that's our map.
Okay, but I just, do you know what this is? Because I'm trying to figure out what, I was part of the previous 10 years ago or whatever it was that we were in the city, and there was the whole point of being near a corridor was a quarter of a mile, and this is not a quarter of a mile, and I know that really well, so I'm trying to decide, it's not. Just, trust me, I measured it several years ago. So I'm just trying to figure out what areas are we talking about specifically as far as being, and I agree with him in the sense that let's just rezone it. Why are we calling a spade when it's not a spade?
So this map, I wasn't sure I wasn't aware we were talking about this map. This map is a blow-up of that map, which is showing, just in terms of the geography, it should be showing, well, I guess we'll have to go back to with our,
electronically, could you put it up on the screen?
we'll go back with our measuring tape and make sure that's a quarter mile. But what it's showing is actually 4 different geographies. Corridors, quarter mile corridors, centers, town centers, quarter mile from the edge of town centers, transit stations, which shouldn't affect you over here, and inner ring neighborhoods, which are also not over here. So the frequent transit corridor and the centers are sort of overlapped. So you're seeing the center, the conjoinment of centers and the corridors on that map.
So is this as a crow fly? Or is
Yes.
So it's not walking. So you
Right.
could walk like
That's right.
a mile. to get to
And I think that's an important distinction, because we're talking about a sort of concept level here, right? So I think one of the reasons we're a little hesitant to blow up the map and show folks the parcel-specific outline is that's not really the heart of the proposal. The heart of the proposal is this notion, this concept of the quarter mile from corridors.
Yeah, I think it is.
Right, so this is where the concept level, we're talking about general direction. It's a starting point for us to have the conversation about where is that exact boundary when we start talking about mapping changes. So the suggestion or the concern about walk sheds and major obstacles, freeway obstacles, those sorts of things, I think that's still part of the conversation that we're yet to have. So this is just a sort of blanket, this is what a quarter mile looks like, and this is where we're starting.
So can I ask another question that's kind of a follow-up, but not really? I know you guys can't address environmental stuff, but we have major environmental water issues and flooding. I mean, we have literally a house that literally had a river going through it when there was a flash flood not that long ago.
So she's asking whether we could or should be considering.
Actually, when?
When, okay. She's asking when we're going to get to the consideration of things like infrastructure and environmental impacts. And that is part of the next phase. Also with the City Council's direction to look at encouraging more additional units in areas that are in these geographies was the caveat of where it is appropriate. And where it is appropriate is dependent on infrastructure and service availability. And the infrastructure speaks to stormwater as well.
So why isn't that in the proposal? Infrastructure, availability, 20-minute walking, vision zero, all the things, all the other silos that are in the city. Seems like this has been removed from a lot of it.
That was not an intention. So I think that's so again, we're in this public feedback period. I think that's a really good comment to submit for us.
Environmental includes landslide also.
That's right.
When you did
I'd like to find somebody who hasn't had a chance to speak yet. And
people back here,
I feel like bingo. Green jacket.
Thank you. I want to ask a clarifying question. So I love the form thing. That's great, setbacks, and I realize that it's all going to be different in each one. I like the idea of talking about making the heights fit in and the styles fit in, all that. But there's just a lot of details that aren't really clear yet. Like, in some places it says, well, we're going to make things fit in with the neighbors, and then you'll say, but if you do it extra dense, or you do an affordable unit, or you do whatever, there's no design review, or there's a lower level of design review. And if you don't do the review, then how do we know they're actually making it affordable? And we've had a lot of experience with developers saying they're going to do one thing, and then what they build is something completely different. Or they say they're going to save the tree, and the next thing you know, the tree's coming down. Or they say they're not going to flood the street, but the next thing you know, they build an 8,000 square foot house, and then the neighbors are all flooded. Yeah. So we really have to know more about the details of how it's going to be implemented. Even if you say it'll be implemented on a case-by-case basis, I think that's helpful for us to trust that the general concepts are actually going to work, because otherwise the general concepts aren't going to work.
I understand the thirst for more detail, and I'm actually one of those people that tends to get way deep in the weeds. It's a little bit of, I think our stakeholder committee can testify to that. But again, this is a two-step process. One, we're sort of in this level. We're talking, what is the big picture? What is our objectives? What is the intent? What are we trying to achieve? And the detail you're thirsty for will be part of the next phase when we're writing code, and that gets down to thou shalt X, Y, and Z, and how we measure square footage and all of those details. So we don't have that level of detail. It's really what we're looking for is this the right direction? Are we heading the right way? Some folks, you've heard some folks, we're going too small. Some folks may say that we're still too big. Some folks say that's too many units. Some folks will say that's not enough. So that's kind of the sort of dialogue that we are hoping to have. This gentleman has been waiting patiently.
First of all, I like your height thing. I think that clarifies things. I think it's an appropriate thing. I like the,
Speak a little louder.
I like the height thing. I think that's appropriate. I think the flat roof thing, and I think that's done well. I like the setback stuff, so that's the good stuff. I think you're way understating what needs to be done in that middle area where we don't have things. I see a lot of stuff about house size on lots and so on. The question I have is 2,500 square foot house on a 5,000 square foot lot. What if we have an interior ADA? Is that going to increase that another 825 to 30? What's that, 33?
So the question is whether an internal accessory dwelling unit, one that's inside the house, is that allowed to go up another 800 square feet per this proposal? And the answer is no. So that's actually a little bit of a detail. So the 800 additional square feet is for a detached structure, and the intent there is to take that, I guess, a combination of 3,300 square feet and spread it out.
So to me, that makes no sense at all. That's just stupid. Make it more expensive to have an ADU that has to be separated rather than inside. Then if you've got a big family, you can have both. Whereas the way you're doing it, it costs you a lot more money. You got all this extra infrastructure. It doesn't make sense. So change that.
Do you think the house structure size should be increased with an internal ADU? Is that what I'm hearing you say? Okay, and I heard a few nods here.
You have a conversion in a duplexes, and you're not talking about the square foot. So let's say you already have a house that's 3,500 square feet, and you make it into a duplex, or you make it into a house with an ADU, right? You're converting it.
Yeah.
You get to keep that, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, if you're building another house next door on a vacant lot that happens to be inbuilt, we wouldn't it make sense to build something that's similar with an internal ADU? That's how you would fit into the neighborhood, right?
Except if the house on the other side of it is 1,500 square feet, and then you have that scale difference.
Right.
Right, so if you have a 3,500 square foot house, a vacant lot, and a 1,500 square foot house,
Right.
what does the middle one get to look like? And that's what that conversation, and we have talked about that, definitely during the discussions in the last year.
We had someone who's had her hand up for a long time right here in the back and we moved for things that are.
Yes, go ahead.
Piggybacks off the gentleman's question regarding the 2,500 feet, 2,500 square feet. I know you shared that the average household reduces from 2.3 to 2.1. I'm just curious, how do we, when do we get that data? Because Portland Public Schools is saying that there's an increase. So if we have an increase, then the increase in the school system, where are they living?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, maybe we should readdress that data or look at that data.
It's a great question. So the question was, the household size decreasing to 2.1 by 2035. And I think in addition to that was the other bullet I had there, which was that 25% of households by the end of 2035 will have children in them. And that's a decrease also from 28% to 25%. And so the question the lady had was Portland Public Schools, though, is planning for more families with children. So where is the discrepancy in that? And we definitely work with the school district, and we are using all the same numbers, which is not the case in many jurisdictions around the country. And we're using the same numbers and the same projection numbers. The percentage of households with children is decreasing, but the absolute number of households with children is increasing because we'll have more households in Portland. So that's where that discrepancy is. Does that make sense?
Put a chart in there. Stuff that says that.
Where does it say it? It says
Put a chart.
put a chart in, okay. And if you're familiar, if you did follow the comprehensive plan process, the scenarios report has these numbers because we looked at scenario. This gets a little bit to the environmental question that was asked earlier. And when we were doing the comprehensive plan, we did the numbers, how many people are moving here. We don't have 123,000 vacant units in Portland, so where are these people going to live and where are they going to go? And where should we grow? And we did scenario planning and looked at, well, what if most of the growth went in Central City? What if most of the growth went in centers and corridors? What if most of the growth was dispersed? And what we found was that one of the big findings was that 2/3 of the existing buildings that we currently have will continue to be here in 2035. So some of our metrics and goals that we're trying to accomplish to reduce greenhouse gases, increase tree canopy, etc., are really hard to move the dial. But we did find that in the scenario that was adopted by City Council was that growth near centers and corridors performed the best. It increased tree canopy citywide. Perhaps didn't increase it, and I'm not an expert on this, by each center and corridor, but citywide, that's the one that performed the best. And so these ideas aren't brand new ideas to this topic. It's we're taking off from that direction because from a citywide perspective, that's what performs best and allows for the tree canopy to increase, vehicle miles traveled to decrease, greenhouse gas emissions to decrease, etc. Yes.
I have two questions. First, I want to thank you for your good work. I don't think this is an easy topic, and it's complex, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
My concern is character and infrastructure. So I don't feel like character in unique neighborhoods has really been addressed. I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach is appropriate when we're looking at maintaining what makes Portland livable and unique. And so I'd like to see some of the nuances, perhaps the details that flush out how we preserve the unique characters of our neighborhood. Second, I'm concerned about the infrastructure and knowing that you're talking to the different organizations, schools, safety, roads, so that when we're talking about infill, we have the resources in advance of building it. I feel that we're, especially in this area, overcrowding our schools, don't have the sidewalks for safety, and I don't, TriMet stops aren't available. to handle the transport of these people. So where are you recommending infill? Is there thought being given to where infill is going to be done sooner than later? And are you looking in advance and talking with these communities about how to prepare?
So this was a huge conversation during, I hate to bring the comprehensive plan. The question was, well, there's threefold. I'm going to include that. Thank you to staff for that one. The second one was about, she doesn't feel that the one-size-fits-all is really protecting character of neighborhoods, and maybe we need to be nuanced. And to clarify on that point in response to that, the proposal really is to tailor the development standards, like the height to the topography, the setbacks to the neighboring sites. And even so that's the concept right now. The concept isn't to do development standards for all 90-some neighborhood association areas or even the pattern areas. So that's something that we'd like to hear your feedback on. The third point that she was bringing up is infrastructure, and how she was happy that we are working with different infrastructure planning groups. During the Portland plan, many moons ago, we talked about needing a strategy for the city and all of our public partners. So we work closely with the school districts. That's where we have an agreement that we're using the same numbers. We work with TriMet because the city doesn't provide transit. We work with Multnomah County Drainage District and the levee systems, et cetera, et cetera. For infrastructure, that is definitely a huge benefit of our new comprehensive plan, where we work closely with all the city infrastructure planning groups, and they took their project list on where they need to build new projects, whether it be a stormwater swale or what if it's new sidewalks or bike lanes, etc.
How about roads? Traffic's already horrible, and you're going to put another 100,000 cars on the road.
Finish answering this question, please. They took their infrastructure list and they took a fiscally constrained list. So this is the first time that we have a list of projects that's fiscally constrained, and it ties exactly to these centers and corridors. They looked at our comprehensive plan map and said, where are you proposing to have increased densities and where are you not? And that's what they're planning to. So the infrastructure list coincides with our growth strategy.
How do you get that communicated to the general public that you're talking, the plan, you see it, you view it?
Well, we've talked to thousands and thousands of people over 8 years, and the comprehensive plan was just adopted today by City Council. So, I mean, it's definitely part of what we've been thinking about and what we've been learning about. And each of these projects, though, gives us an opportunity to learn, and it's a little different for each topic area.
So am I able to go in there into the detail of my neighborhood and what the expected resources that are going to increase with the anticipated income?
The infrastructure dollars, you can go and look at the comprehensive plan, citywide systems plan map. And now that it's adopted, I'm not sure if the map is up there that you can pull in and see all the projects. Here's a project on Southwest Hamilton from Dodge to Shattuck with an improvement there.
You're going to have a whole other process starting now for doing what's called Southwest in Motion, which is going to bring all of our projects to look at and prioritize in the next year, done by PBOT. So this is starting now. It's a $300,000 or $400,000 project. A lot of staff will be working on it. There'll be a huge amount of input from all of the neighborhoods and so on. So what's down there now will be revised significantly.
And we will then need to amend the comprehensive plan to do that, so the infrastructure bureaus know what the priorities are. Yes. Excuse me? Did all of the city council's amendments get approved with the comp plan? Yes, that got approved. Okay, so.
I must have liked the food. I wasn't impressed.
Oh, really? I love this stuff.
So the lady up front was asking if all the amendments for the comprehensive plan got adopted. I cannot speak exactly to that. I knew that there were many amendments that each city council member were proposing. They had workshops on it. They put each amendment forward, they heard testimony on it, they took, one of the commissioners put it on the table, they needed a second, and then they voted on it. And I don't know what the tally of which amendments. She was specifically talking about P45, which is the missing middle amendment, and that's the one that Morgan was mentioning, which talked about the missing middle. Remember, I talked about we're building big apartments, we're building houses, we're not building much in the middle. So that's the amendment that two of our commissioners sponsored, which was to allow more of that housing type within a quarter mile of these areas, which is that map over there.
This person's had her hand up for about 5 minutes.
Yes, several people have, ma'am, thank you.
So this is just a clarification, but as I look at this, it looks to me like R5 zoning near a corridor or a center is different than R5 zoning that is not within a half a mile of a corridor or a center.
That's what the proposal is, yes.
Yeah, so I would strongly urge you not to do that, because most people are going to see R5 and think that R5 means something. So if you do this plan, don't call it R5, call it R5A, call it R5 corridor. I don't care what you call it, but it needs to be different than an ordinary R5, because that's going to get people very confused, and someone is going to think that they have a piece of property that, you know, isn't supposed to be subdivided, but it can be. The other thing is, does that mean that if you live a half a mile away from the corridor, then the height of the building can be 30 feet from the high point, not the low point?
So a couple of questions embedded in there, or suggestions. A question was relating to this geography of a quarter mile from centers and corridors, and the allowances for multiple units within those areas would be different than areas outside within the same zone. So an R5 zone beyond the quarter mile would be different than an R5 zone in the quarter mile, and her suggestion was that it should be somehow evident and transparent and easily understood that there's a distinction there, and I think we agree with that. That does need to be made clear. So thank you for that. The second half of that was the question: if you're beyond the quarter mile, are these proposals still relating to scale? Do they still apply? And the answer is, at least in the way that it's proposed, the answer is yes. So scale applies citywide. These additional housing types apply to corridors and centers. However, I should also note that the cottage cluster proposal applies to lots anywhere in the city, larger 10,000 square foot lots anywhere in the city. And the R25 minimum unit requirement would apply to all R25 zoned land anywhere in the city. So back to what happens inside, outside the corridor, yes, there should be a clearer distinction so people know what the difference is. But in terms of the additional housing types, that's predominantly the difference for the centers and corridors. I think I've seen your hand up for 6.5 minutes.
I was the one that had the yellow map drawn for. I've been trying to find out what the half-mile radius was for where the center was determined at the very beginning of the comprehensive plan and the land use chart. So I saw this on page 13 of your document. But Joan here, wherever she went, I had that map made. We got it yesterday, and I noticed that it's a quarter mile from the provisional type boundaries, not from some center point. So it's not really a half mile wide. Can you please explain to me how you're measuring that quarter mile and where it's being measured from?
Yeah,
Is that something new? It's entirely different than how it appears to be in this amendment P45. Is that you being consistent with the new comp plan that you got voted in?
So let me start by clarifying. The question was, how was the quarter mile measured from the center? So when we talk about centers, there are various different illustrations of what that center is. Early on in the comp plan conversations, they were bubbles. Later on in the comp plan conversation, they became more defined geometries. And for Multnomah specifically, you already had a designated center, is that right?
Well,
Oh, that's
we
okay.
never
That's
had
right,
a
sorry.
center, we had a main street. And we were told in the process that the neighborhood center and the neighborhood corridor would have the same basic characteristics. And we requested with hundreds of comments to have that neighborhood center designation be removed. So we never knew what the center was. It's defined in the comprehensive plan, even the one that was passed today, as a half-mile radius with 3,500 residents. Now, Joan happened to give us nice numbers. We already have close to 3,500 residents. So I assume that you're going to balance that number out and not exceed that.
Okay, so the quarter mile distance was, to answer your question, was measured from the edge of that designated center in the comp plan. And again, I'm going to go back to the message that we keep repeating, that this is at a concept level, it's a starting point, and we are looking at those evaluation factors of how does this line up with the other policies of the comp plan, infrastructure, and so forth.
So if you had a center that already was designated very wide, like say where Hillsdale already had really wide boundaries, that quarter mile is going to go from the outside of their boundaries. So it would go like way up to, it might go up to Fremont or something, or Fairmont.
Right. So again, this is a starting point. We will look at that. Thank you.
I have a follow-up.
Yes?
Okay, my name's Laura Campos, and I wrote a book a year before the comp plan, the original one, was, it was completed in 1980. So I wrote this in 1979, and I was only 26, but I said, you know, as the automobile isn't used so much, we're going to be going to transit, and we should locate development along commercial and residential centers. And then I also said, oh, the size of households are going to decrease, and we're going to need more housing, more different types of housing. And I don't know, maybe it's just old age, but something doesn't sound right to me, because I'm hearing it again, and it's 2016. And like Jim said, we already did that in the original comp plan. I mean, there's something that doesn't ring true for me, and I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. So.
So we're getting close to our 8:30 mark. I'm going to take one more question, and I wish I had a raffle, and then we'll wrap it up. But I wanted to also mention, just to remind you, we are looking for your feedback. Questions are helpful, but your feedback is also important. So we have an online questionnaire, and we have our email address if you want to send us comments that way as well.
The gentleman standing over there has been trying to get your name.
All right, we're all going with the gentleman over here. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. My question concerns the projected numbers of growth. And I'm going to say that for me, it took me a long time to try to come to the crux of what the comp plan is all about. And in the very first page, it sets the stage for what comes, and namely Portland is expected to grow. And of course, then it says 260,000 new residents, roughly 620,000 people who live here today, and about 140,000 new jobs as a result as of that. And you know, a lot of us have difficulty with the veracity of those numbers. Now you'll notice I said the veracity of the numbers. I didn't say you were lying, you know. I'm just saying we have difficulty trying to understand that because, for example, here's something that I got off the web today. This is from the Bureau of the United States Census. And it says 5 of the nation's 11 fastest growing cities are in Texas. And of the 20 top fast growing cities in the United States, Portland is not even among the top 20. So I would like to give you this, and would like to know where these numbers came from. Okay, now one of your good people referred me to Dennis Yee, and he's in charge. He works for Metro, I understand, and this man, good worker with you folks. He says that Dennis Yee he's the allocation model specialist. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to see Mr. Yee, and I want to know, where did that number come from? How was that done? Okay? And I thought, as soon as I saw this, I thought, well, Portland's going to be right up there. I mean, look what we're getting here, growth. We got to do something about growth. Growth is all we hear. But we're not one of the fastest growing cities. So I ask you, what is going on? It's hard to have faith in what we're hearing when we're getting new evidence to the contrary. Thank you very much.
I do, just in response to that, so we can close the loop on that. That's one of the reasons I shared the slide that showed population increase in Portland from 2010 when we started doing these numbers, and we heard from people that, no, Portland's not going to grow that much. No, Portland's not going to grow that much. There was a dip during the recession, but we are on the trajectory and we are on track given the last 5 years of growth. And I think many people can feel it. I know I can. I think there's more traffic. I think I stand in line at restaurants longer. I think I have to think 9 months ahead of time if I want to go camping with my children. And I better have made a reservation at the campsites. So I think most of us can feel that there are more people coming to Portland. We might not be one of the 10 fastest growing cities or the 20. I'm curious to read this, but those are the numbers we're working with too. Again, thank you all for coming tonight. It is 8:30. We appreciate all your questions and we appreciate your patience with us and the questions we were able to answer.